Services and products. Today I'm talking about scenarios assessing managerial judgment. Well, welcome. My name's Max Choi. I'm a chartered psychologist from Quest Partnership. Our organisation provides a range of services and products. Today I'm talking about scenarios assessing managerial judgment. So, the webinar, I'll cover these points. What is managerial judgment? Background to situational judgment tests, affectionately known as SJTs. The managerial scenarios test. Mention the international scenarios test version. Cover the uses and benefits, validity and costs. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, a definition. What is managerial judgment? So, an individual's ability to weigh up real-life management situations and decide on appropriate and effective ways of handling them. First thing to note is that it's not simply intelligence or IQ. We did a lot of research, and particularly based on Robert Sternberg's work around practical intelligence and this concept of management tacit knowledge. So management tacit knowledge, give you a bike analogy. If you try to explain to a person who can't ride a bike how you ride a bike, it's not easy to articulate, is it really? And management tacit knowledge is a bit like that, because it, just like riding a bike, it relies on the underlying ability or skill, but then we develop that further in terms of exposure and experience and also transfer of learning. Give you a bit of background to how we developed the managerial tests. Now, previously there was only ability tests for management level, so things like verbal and numerical critical reasoning, and they're still used today for management recruitment. Now, we're not rubbishing verbal and numerical tests. You know, they are actually very useful, but they give us limited information. So, for example, a person who scores high on numerical reasoning, it doesn't really make us or tell us that they're effective managers. Okay, so yeah, sure. You know, having high-level numerical skills might be useful for some management roles, but it doesn't really mean that they're brilliant managers. So it was literally about 20 years ago when Alan Howard and myself, we set out to do research to look into this area and try to devise a new management test. And we were the first to come out with the first commercial situational judgment test, which measures managerial judgment. So now there are a suite of management tests called scenarios tests, marketed by CB, and also other test publishers have copied our approach really. So there's quite a lot of SJTs floating around. Bit more about SJTs then. So they assess judgment and decision-making skills. So the way they work is that the test taker will be presented with realistic management situations, and they'll be asked to rate the effectiveness of a series of responses. Correct answers have been obtained from managerial subject matter experts, and candidates' answers are scored against these. You might be wondering where the subject matter experts came from. So what we did is we approached lots of large organisations. We identified the ones which were doing very well and were likely to be continue to do well. So on the basis that these organisations are run by effective managers, we asked the effective managers to respond to quite a few of our scenarios, and from this we identified the correct responses. So that's the approach. Here's an example of a scenario. Actually not a real scenario from these tests, because we can't really do that. We need to keep that confidential and not put it on this webinar. But this is actually very close to the first scenario from the management level SJT. So it's quite short and it gets people warmed up, really. That's the idea of this shorter scenario to begin with. So you have just been promoted to run a department which was reputably well managed and highly effective under your predecessor. She has subsequently been promoted to a new post within the organisation in another part of the country. During your initial week, you would 1. Inform your staff that as the new manager, you'll be bringing in your preferred processes and methods immediately. 2. Personally conduct an immediate and critical review of all existing departmental policies and practices. 3. Ask your staff for ideas on how to make further improvements to the department. So what the candidate or participant needs to do is to rate each response in terms of how effective it is to deal with the situation. And here's a rating scale. So first of all, they need to decide whether it's an undesirable thing to do or a desirable thing to do. If undesirable, how undesirable? So -3, -2, -1, or if desirable, +1, +2, +3. So going back to the first question, inform your staff that as the new manager, you'll be bringing in your preferred processes and methods immediately. So the candidate might think that's a very desirable thing to do and give it a +3. So that's quite useful to get a feel for how this test works, you see, because it's not just measuring judgment or ability, it's also measuring behaviour. So, you know, a candidate might just feel that, well, that's my approach to working. I'm always going to be introducing my preferred ways of doing things when I get on with stuff, really. So in a sense, the scenarios test is measuring ability as well as behaviour and preference. So bear that in mind, we'll pick that up later. So moving on, there's 3 scenarios tests. Executive scenarios aimed at board, director and senior management level. Managerial scenarios aimed at professionals and managers, and graduate scenarios aimed at graduate intakes. This webinar is focused around the managerial scenarios, but obviously the things I mentioned are relevant for and appropriate for all 3 scenarios tests. Now the test has an overall score. It's called managerial judgment, okay, and so low score managerial judgment, that means less effective at weighing up managerial situations and dealing with them. A high score, we mean effectively weighing up managerial situations and handling them. Okay, so this is a main measure, and obviously the higher the score, the better for this managerial judgment score. It is normed, okay, so you get percentiles, tens and grades. There are also 3 subscales for supporting the managerial judgment. So managerial objectives, people management and reputation management. And again, the higher the score, the better in terms of these 3 subscales. And the subscales were derived from factor analysis research. So we didn't really make up these. This is what came out from the research data. Okay, so a bit more on these 3 subscales. Managing objectives, primarily about the skills to manage your work area. So making best use of your energies at work, the ability to prioritise, deals with challenges, engages appropriate support. Okay, then we got the people management area. So this is about managing people. So effectively manage a team, deal with team and individual problems whilst maintaining motivation and performance, leading and communicating with the workforce. Then the 3rd subscale, reputation management. So this is about managing one's reputation within an organisation, positively supports the long-term interests of the organisation, understands the political sensitivities, balance careerism. To support each subscale, there are 2 elements. And the elements are working like personality scales, I guess, on the basis that yes, they are measuring ability, but they also pick up behaviours. So on that basis, the elements, when you get a high score, doesn't necessarily mean they're highly effective, unlike the subscales and then the main managerial judgment score. Okay, so these are bit like personality scales. On that basis, the elements shouldn't be used directly to support selection, just like we don't use personality scales to directly support selection. Okay, so they can be used to understand the individual, and therefore they're better used to support development. Now, that means in terms of the measures, we got 10 measures in total for the test. 6 elements, 3 subscales, and an overall managerial judgment score. And just for your information, the BPS has classified scenarios as an ability test, although you now know that it sort of sits in between ability and personality. We'll look at the elements in a bit more detail. So the 2 managing objectives elements, big picture. So that's about understanding the wider organizational issues. Okay, and delegative. So just allowing you a bit of time to read some of the texts to support these elements here. Delegative. So about delegation and self-management. The people management elements, so we got one-to-one as the first one. So it's about managing and motivating individuals. And the team is very much about managing and motivating a team. So they're the 2 people management elements. Reputation management elements, the first one's personal recognition. So this is about managing one's reputation. So the low score actually means that they may overdo this somewhat. Okay, so they might push their achievements highly, whereas a high on personal recognition might actually mean they don't do enough of this really, and they might undersell themselves. As it says, they may overestimate the importance of letting results speak for themselves rather than occasionally highlighting own achievements. And for this scale, it's quite interesting that you can see that perhaps the best place to be is in the middle somewhere really. Okay. And for company protocol, this one's about corporate values. So the low score might mean that they might take a bit of a selfish stance on things and be less concerned about organisational goals and the like. Whereas high scorers are perhaps less focused on one's own needs and very much about trying to achieve organisational objectives and seeing the need for corporate values. The report also provides development points, so this can be very useful, especially for the individual getting some useful feedback. So here's a couple of development points from the one-to-one elements, okay, for people management. Beware of taking away work from individuals without their consent. What do you think this may be saying to them, and how would this affect your ongoing relationship with them? Ensure that you consult staff before changing their roles. Check that they are comfortable with the new roles, even if you think that you are giving them greater or better responsibilities. So the development points are generated when the response is significantly away from the correct answer. So for example, if the correct answer is -3, and the candidate put down a +3 or +2, then they're significantly away from the correct answer, and that generates a development point for them. So just to convey a few things about the international scenarios tests. This will be of particular interest to organisations that have a global presence. Now, quite interestingly, quite a few people didn't believe we could achieve an international scenarios test, and that's sort of makes sense because, you know, most people would think, well, there's all these cultural differences and other challenges, and so therefore it might be quite difficult to get a test that works around different countries with very different cultures. So it wasn't easy, but we managed to achieve it. So how do we do that? Well, we looked at a lot of the data we had already, because lots of managers have taken the scenarios tests around the globe. In fact, over 8,000 managers. So we looked at all the data. We also conducted more research by getting even more managers around the globe to complete it. Also, I can't tell you all the things we did, but the key things, we identified questions which weren't working. Obviously, they worked in the UK because that's where the test was developed. But when you get questions not working in particular countries, then it causes a problem for an international version. So unfortunately, we had to lose some of the questions. Some other questions weren't really working, but could be saved really, and they were ones which had language issues. So this tells us that English is actually quite a challenging language if you're English is your second language. So we could save some of these questions because we just had to improve the sentences really to make sure that people were picking up the real meaning. So we did things like that, and we produced an international scenarios test. However, we still found that some regions around the globe still didn't really perform as well as the UK managers. But this wasn't necessarily a big problem because we had the region norm groups. So, for example, you know, a manager in India would be compared against other managers in India. So that still makes good sense, and it had useful practical applications on that basis. And when we looked into the research findings, it became apparent that a lot of the differences were due to management training and development. And in a sense, you know, the fact that we have third world countries which are not as well developed as other countries, well, that would mean that perhaps that even in areas of management and leadership, they're not quite as well developed as other countries. And we had other interesting evidence to support that. So, for example, the scenarios test score was correlated with the country's per capita GDP. In other words, countries achieving high per capita GDP have more effective managers, and this all makes sense, you know, on that basis. Okay, so just to give you a feel for how scenarios can be used. So we got 3 tests, so obviously it can support recruitment and development for graduates, managers and executives. It can be used to support pre-screening for interview and assessment centre. Can be used to support succession planning, like identifying managerial potential in individuals, and also readiness for fast track. Very effective in supporting coaching and mentoring processes, and also to support individuals' development plans, and to support things like development centres and talent programs. And it has been used to support executive thinking for top teams and in developing management skills. Yeah, it can also be used to alongside other psychometrics, so like personality questionnaires and 360. And when you combine it with personality, if you think about it, ability tests gives us a feel for what people can do, but when you combine it with personality, then you move it to what people will do. So that's quite interesting. For those who can't run a full assessment centre, then introducing scenarios will be very beneficial because it gives you an objective assessment of managerial judgment. Now, if you're able to run an assessment centre, then using scenarios is still very useful because assessment centres, when assessors are involved, then there's still elements of subjectivity really. So using scenarios where we're assessing managerial judgment in a highly objective manner. So just to identify some of the key benefits of using scenarios. So it measures realistic managerial judgment and decision making. The 3 SJTs allow us to measure the 3 levels of managerial judgment. It's well researched and a proven technology. When you combine it with other assessments, it gives you a much more broader and clearer picture. It's fair and objective. Indeed, has very little adverse impact when compared to other ability tests, which tend to have adverse impact issues. It's available in several languages, and more languages will be available. And an international version is available for global organisations. In terms of completion, it's done online. It's untimed because we do need responses to all the questions. So typically it takes 25 to 40 minutes, depending on the scenarios version. Depending on the scenarios version, there's 12 to 16 scenarios. Okay, once candidates have completed, we will email you reports very quickly. Okay, just a bit about validity. So as you can appreciate, the scenarios, the way it's been designed, it's designed to measure managerial judgment. So one would expect it to have good validity, and what we find is that it does. So high scorers do achieve better job performance ratings. High scorers are in more senior roles, okay, and that's when we take into account other factors. Test scores correlate with overall assessment centre rating, so we've looked at quite a lot of assessment centre research into that, obviously focusing on assessment centres which we know are run effectively and do work. And then another interesting finding is that females score slightly better than males, okay, although it's not statistically significant. And we think that's probably due to the fact that females actually have slightly more emotional intelligence than us blokes. And just in terms of using the test, so I'm sure you want to know what the costs are. So the costs include online setup and report. Graduate scenarios and management scenarios is £79 plus VAT, and the executive scenarios is £100 plus VAT. In terms of placing an order, all you need to do is give us a call or send us an email. Tell us the scenarios test you're interested in and the role or job, so we can work out the best norm that you require. Then we need the candidates' names, the candidates' email addresses, and the deadline for completion for the candidates. Alternatively, you can also place your order on our Test and Assess website, so it's testandassess.co.uk. Okay, so that's the end of the webinar. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next webinar. Take care. Bye.